My guest in today's podcast episode is Ray Nicholus. And aside from sharing a last name that almost is the same as my first name, we actually share a lot of similar philosophies when it comes to managing and leading engineering teams. We got to hear about taking opportunities in terms of saying yes and no to certain things and when that makes sense and when it doesn't. And of course, leading engineering teams as an introvert. And for those of you that don't know, I am very introverted. I might not seem like it when I'm talking on video, but you'll get to see in this episode how we talk about being introverted and what that really means as an engineering leader and trying to turn on the right sort of social cues when you need to in the right settings. So I think that you're really going to enjoy this one. I personally had a lot of takeaways where I was like, yes, that seems like it's very similar to how I like to look at stuff. So a lot of maybe confirmation bias for me, but overall a really awesome conversation. So sit back, enjoy, and I'll see you next time. Well, Ray, if you don't mind kicking us off, would you like to give us a little bit of background for your career journey? And like I said before we started recording, you can start as early as you want.
Yep. So I kind of feel like I've been one of the lucky ones where I always knew I wanted to work with computers. I mean, since as long as I can remember, learned BASIC when I was 10, C when I was like 12 or 13, working with Slackware at 14. My first job was fixing computers for a school district before I could even drive. I've always kind of wanted to work with computers. And then, I studied computer science, and right out of college, I started with a software engineering job, and I was the first software engineer at a startup in Madison, Wisconsin, which was, daunting for me because it was kind of an odd way to start a career. Normally, when you're jumping into a career, any career, especially out of college, because, as you probably know, college doesn't really, it potentially helps you think, but it doesn't really prepare you for the realities of work. So I didn't really have anyone to learn from there. I was sort of on my own and just had to make things happen. So it was kind of trial by fire. And I feel like that made me a stronger engineer right from the beginning because I had to develop stronger problem solving skills because it was kind of fight or flight. Is that right? Flight or fight? Right.
Yeah. And I'm assuming no internships or anything. So it was kind of probably like mostly theoretical stuff from college. And then like, by the way, like now this is the real world. Software's got to happen. And
yeah. And I was doing like as a night job or day job, and I had night classes. I was doing IT work for various companies just to supplement my what meager income I had at the time. My first real job writing software was the day after graduation, more or less.
Awesome. Okay. And so how long did you stay at the startup? Like what was that like?
Yeah, so I stayed there a year and a half, and it was a long year and a half. Not to disparage the startup. I mean, my boss was great. It was great people, but it was really tough. Like I was the first software engineer there, and they hired a few others, and I was pseudo managing them, but I had no business being a manager at that point. And I was getting, I was always on call. Yahoo was one of our customers, so I was getting paged at 3 a.m. And at some point I said, I got to do something else. I got to go somewhere else. This is too much for me. So I went to a much, much, much bigger company where I could learn from people. And I did that for, I don't know, was it 4 or 6 years? I can't remember. It was Avid, which is a giant, video company, video software company. So that was a little bit of a relief because it was sort of a reset where I had an opportunity to learn from much more experienced engineers. Okay. And that's when I was first introduced to the web, like web development at that point. I just been doing server-side Java-based development, C++, and at the tail end of that job is when I kind of got into web development, web-based development, and that's kind of where I've been at ever since, more or less.
Interesting. And if you don't mind me asking, like going from, because you called out having more like experienced people to learn from, which makes sense, right? Some places, like sometimes at startups, you might have some really awesome senior engineers right there from the start, and then it's a close working relationship, and that's great. Bigger companies, statistically, there's probably just going to be more experienced people around you. But what else like did you notice going from like a kind of like very early startup where you're like one of the first engineers to like now you're dropped into a big company, and like the structure, like what else was kind of going on for you?
Yeah, there was a lot of structure. So I learned a lot of things going from a small company to a big company. Obviously, there were a lot of things to learn at the small company, but I had nothing to compare it to. At the big company, there were some obvious differences. There was a lot more structure, like you mentioned, quite a bit more structure, which I think was probably good at that point in my career to experience some structure instead of constant chaos. The other thing was I sort of realized at that point, it was something I needed, right? I needed more structure. I needed more senior people to learn from. But the major difference that I noticed, and that's something I took to heart for the rest of my career, is, and this is, obviously this is all subjective. This is the way I see things. Not everybody sees it this way, of course. But at a larger company, I felt my contributions were like throwing a pebble into the ocean, right? You can create some value, but how many people are going to notice that value? How valuable are your contributions really? There's thousands of other people at the company versus a smaller company where I'm one of 5 engineers and one of 10 people. Everything you do, not for better or for worse, has a major dramatic effect on the company. And I think after I became a little bit more confident in my abilities working for the larger company, I realized, hey, I do want to be able to have more of an effect on the company. I want what I'm doing to be realized. I want to make a difference. I don't just want to be a cog, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting reflection of that. And I found so I also worked at a startup, like at a school, did that for 8 years, and then work at Microsoft now. So very much like a small company to big company. And whenever I talk about impact and reflect on it, I always feel like it's a weird thing to kind of to quantify. So when I worked at a startup, it was for digital forensics, and the impact, I was like, well, it's not like millions of users across the planet, but like we help police officers, law enforcement, investigators. Like a lot of the time there was helping rescue kids from sexual abuse and things like that. So like from an impact and like how rewarding that feels, like that was pretty incredible. And I don't know if I'll ever kind of top that feeling of impact. And then going to Microsoft, I like how you said that though. It's the space I work in, there's impact potentially to millions of users. But in terms of like how I feel my impact is to the company, like it feels like a pebble, even though it's potentially millions of end users. So it's an interesting thing. And so you started to have this realization, and then you wanted to go to smaller companies again to kind of get that feeling back.
Yeah, that's what I've done ever since. That was the only really big company I've worked for. Every company after that has been a pretty small company. I would say probably the largest was a few jobs ago, but even that wasn't very big. They've all been very small to relatively small companies, and that's been deliberate. But as I mentioned, that the whole big company isn't for me kind of thing is subjective, but I can see reframing that where you work for a large company like Microsoft, but you see sort of your team, your organization is more or less the company that you're affecting. It's like a small company, right? I wonder, does it feel like that at Microsoft for you?
Yeah, it's very funny you mentioned that because I would say, so I've been at Microsoft just over 5 years now, like 5 years and 2 weeks kind of thing. And I didn't feel that way for a while. And then very recently I was having this reflection, and I was thinking like the sort of the org that I'm in right now. And I don't mean the greater org that's like thousands of people. I mean sort of like up to my skip level manager. And then even my manager, I was like, hey, we're a team, but we're kind of broken into these smaller teams. And when I was thinking about the size of that and kind of at the pace we're going and stuff, I was like, that's actually quite comparable to like some of the early days in the startup. So if you kind of draw this boundary around that, I'm like, it actually does kind of feel like that. The big difference is that you have like insulation or other things around you. Whereas like at a startup, it was like, we didn't even know how to have we had engineer, we had senior engineer. We're like, we don't know what else to do for like career structure. Like you're kind of coming up with all these things. So that's probably the other big thing is around us. We have this insulation of like a enormous company, but the feeling of like the team and the structure and the growth of that it kind of feels like a mini company.
Yeah, that's sort of what I did get that feeling at the company I was at, but I probably just didn't wasn't mature enough to assume that sort of mindset, but I'm seeing it now.
Yeah, and like I was just kind of admitting to, I did not really see that before. And honestly, probably over the last week, I was having this reflection. So that's why it's, yeah, very very funny timing. But yeah, it does kind of feel like that. So yeah, that's cool. So what about like, so if you're going to smaller companies, you did mention web development. Has the domain, like aside from just being web, has the domain been very different across the different companies, or like did you stick to particular like industries within like web development?
The domain, the type of customer we're serving has certainly been different,
Okay.
but it's all more or less been B2B.
Mm.
I'm trying to think of a scenario where it really wasn't B2B, and I'm not coming up with one. So yeah, the industries have been, it's all been SaaS stuff,
Okay.
mostly selling SaaS-based products to larger companies with a web presence and in some cases a mobile presence.
Interesting. Okay. And for you in that development experience, I'm going to be guessing if it were smaller companies, did you find yourself doing sort of like full stack? Like you kind of mentioned the beginning, there was more like some sounded like back end work, but I'm guessing maybe it's been more full stack since then.
Yeah, so like I said, started out with backend, and then it was full stack for a while, and to some degree, it's kind of always been full stack, as you mentioned. But I think when I sort of was introduced to my first introduction to web development was through like jQuery. So that was sort of how I saw web development initially, and that was back in, I don't know, was that 2011, and that's when browsers were quite a bit different than they are now, and something like jQuery was very, very important. And I was just sort of fell in love with that the web development. It was just so different from what I was used to before. I could see how I could create something that users could, it was visual. It's something that I could create that users could see and use right away versus this thing running on Slackware somewhere in a rack of servers in a data center. Not to say anything bad about backend engineering, because I still enjoy doing that to some degree, but there was something a lot different about front-end web development. And I kind of focused more on that as a full stack developer for a while. And I kind of became more or less an expert in that area. And I carried that on throughout my career. But I found that my first pivot was from back end to front end, and with sort of a full stack thing going on there. But I wanted to sort of branch out more. I didn't feel like being pigeonholed into front end development. So I started doing a lot of DevOps stuff. I started picking up QA work. And then later down the road, management came in, and that was yet another pivot. But I just sort of felt like this is another thing that I wouldn't say that you can do it at smaller companies. It's that you have to do it at smaller companies. Is wearing all those hats, right?
Yeah.
You have to wear a lot of hats. There isn't as many levels of hierarchy. And at a company of 10 people, if a customer support request comes in and the customer support person is at lunch, well, one of the engineers is probably going to need to pick that up. And that's fine. It sort of made me a more well-rounded person. And I kind of enjoyed being able to do that sort of thing, having a wide variety of roles that I could fill at any given time.
Yeah, when you had mentioned, like, as soon as you mentioned, like, doing DevOps work and then had said QA right after, it's like, oh, yes, like, given that you worked at smaller places, it's very much, like, I would say, like, if I went to a smaller company after Microsoft at some point, I would very much imagine myself, I have to remind myself, got to wear all the hats. And for anyone that's listening, like, I would say, especially if you have not yet worked in a smaller company, whether that's because you started at a bigger one or you're not yet, at your first place. Smaller places, I would say, it's an expectation. It might be unwritten, but it's kind of out of necessity, right? It's not. You might be like, hey, cool, can I have that opportunity? And it's like, sure, because it's basically going to be handed to you right away.
Right.
It needs to get
It's
done.
like all hands on deck all the time. And I, like I said, I like that, right? I don't want to be, Ray, the front end manager, Ray, the front end developer, or Ray, the back end developer, Ray, the DevOps guy, Ray, the QA guy. I just want to be, Ray, the engineer, right? And I do the things that need to be done to get that, to get the product across the finish line, or to get the feature done. And that could be writing the front end and writing the back end and doing QA automation and setting up the infrastructure, or being involved in all that to some degree.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because as you were talking through some of that career journey, like it sounds like in the beginning when you were very fresh to it, like that was probably a little bit too chaotic, right? Like some structure was needed, but now that you have a lot of that experience, you can kind of lean into like it feels good to be able to go do the things that like need to get done.
Yeah, I think it's just sort of a confidence that you build up over the course of your career. And maybe when you get to a certain point, this is n equals one, but maybe when you get to a certain point, that confidence allows you to makes it easier for you to do all those different things and wear all those different hats and not sort of wonder, well, can I really do this? Should I really be doing this? You just sort of do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, I can remember stuff in early startup days where it was like it's gotta get the fact that I'm in management now is literally because of that. They said the team's growing, you can talk to the engineers, like we're gonna be hiring more, like do you want to try leading the team? And it was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm fresh out of school. Like and I guess that's actually pretty typical management onboarding is no one knows what's going on. So here you go. But that's something I stuck to. But there was lots of things you mentioned, like with customer support and stuff. I can remember, like, yeah, like we got to go triage things, and like that's not what I worked on, but we have to go look into it. Like, there's no choice.
Yeah, the thing that kind of annoys me the most is when I hear that's not my job kind of thing.
Yeah,
You don't really hear that from good employees, from good engineers. It's not my job. I mean, it's especially at a smaller company that's sort of a taboo thing to say. But it's sort of off topic a little bit. Before you were an engineering manager, right? You were an IC or an individual contributor, right? This
yeah,
is and this is something that I think about a lot, and I'm kind of wondering what your thoughts on it are, and
sure.
maybe how you approach this. Are you more of a hands-on manager? Like, do you like to sort of dig into the code, or do you like to focus more on your people, or a little bit of both, or well, how does that worked out for you so far in your career? Like,
Great question.
what have you liked to do?
Yeah, yeah, and this has changed a lot in my career, and I think it. Part of it's because being at a startup where like every hat had to be worn. Part of it now is like not at a startup, and the other thing that I would layer onto that is like sort of experience in my career. So for context, at this point, I code every single day, but not at work. Because I like I just enjoy it. It's a hobby of mine, so I like building software. But at work now, I don't because number one, I have a team of very smart engineers that is capable of doing that. I review code with them, like I participate at that level, but I don't write the code. Um, if I'm gonna kind of rewind a little bit though. For when I was working at a startup, for 8 years, I was a like IC and manager like at the same time. And so I wrote code, I built a lot of the products with my teams and managed them as well. But um, there was I remember talking with my HR leader like throughout those all of those years, and she would ask me this not in a way that was like trying to force me to make a decision, but she would say like, "Hey, like have you considered like which path do you kind of want to go down here?" And I kept saying like, "I don't know," because like part of me felt that I could still contribute a lot of value by writing code, working with my team that way. And the other part of me was like, yeah, but I really do enjoy managing the team, helping people out. Like there's something really fulfilling for me about kind of helping people grow. And so like I'm not solving their problems, but I'm helping them kind of navigate them so that they can basically they end up solving their own problems. That's
You're a
really fulfilling.
facilitator. Hmm.
Yeah, so like I look at my like in my role, it's a very much a support role. And what happened towards the end of those 8 years was that towards the end, I was managing two teams. My time actually contributing to the code base was less and less. And given the company growth, I spent a lot of time kind of like helping other teams and navigating things like at a higher level. Um, and like I had history at the company, so I could kind of do that in these different areas where people are like, "Hey, wait, how does this work again?" Or, we're about to go dig up this feature, but I remember you talked about something like this in the past, and we had explored this before. So, kind of like consulting for other teams at the company, and so even at that's like 5 years ago now. So at that point till now, I've found that in order for, or it's not in order for me to grow, but I have found that I reached a point where I can have greater impact by typing less code. And if I think about my career progression, so I've been an engineering manager for 13 years, but I'm still not I am not a manager of managers. And if I want to be a manager of managers, technically I would have had a director position if I like stayed a little bit longer where I was before 5 years ago. But if I would have, sorry, if I want to be a manager of managers, I would have even less time to be writing code. It would be a lot more strategy, be a lot more working with managers to help them navigate different things. And so I feel like if I want my career to move in that direction, it's not that I am not allowed to put my hands on the code or that I shouldn't, but if I'm doing that, I'm probably not. What's a good way to say this? It should be a almost like an emergency or a reaction to a scenario, not a commonplace thing. I should go, hey, look, if I need to be doing this, there's probably a skill gap or like a, I don't like calling people resources, like a headcount gap, like skill gap, whatever. And I should have more like someone on the team to be able to help with this. So that's, I think, my long-winded answer, but.
Yeah, and so you had that opportunity initially to sort of explore both worlds at the same time, IC and manager, and then you were able to sort of make that choice. And I totally identify what you say about, the moving up to the point where you're a manager of managers, right? Now you're sort of touching the code almost looks like you're being negligent in your duties as at that position to some degree. And
Yes.
I think that's probably tough for people like you and me where we really enjoy coding. And I mean, me speaking personally, I coding is also kind of in my blood, and I don't think that I could just totally sever myself from that entirely. And I can, even now as a manager, that's the thing I struggle with the most, honestly, right now, is I know what I'm supposed to do as a manager. Mm-hmm. I know what my responsibilities are. And I'm expected to be hands-on to some degree, right? Especially at a smaller company, because, again, wearing lots of hats. But it's important, and this is something I'm still working on myself, to understand when you should just back away and trust your engineers to make a decision, to make an architectural decision, and when you should jump in to help. And I think that the thing that's the most difficult to realize until you're told it is, as a manager, when you're stepping in there, let's say let me give like a contrived example here.
Sure, yeah.
You are, there's a proposal to go a technical direction for like a feature. And the team makes a decision, right? They've decided they're going to go this particular way. And you see an opportunity where you feel like it isn't going quite right. So you interject and say, hey, everyone, I feel like maybe we should do these very specific things in the code instead. Mm-hmm. And everybody does it. So you think, oh, well, my idea must have been the right one. So great, I'm glad I stepped in. But it turns out that isn't necessarily the case. What probably happened is everyone agreed because they're like, yep, my manager said this is the right way to do it. So that's the way I'm going to do it. Not because it's the better way, but it's, and if you don't realize that's what's going on, then you sort of see that as an opportunity. Well, I should be jumping in more. I should be contributing more to code. And then it's sort of a vicious cycle, and it sort of spirals. And now your engineers don't feel like they're trusted at all. And I'm not saying it's ever gotten to that point in my career, but I often try to take the opportunity to jump in the code, and I have to sort of restrain myself. Sometimes I'm not able to. That's the toughest part for me, is being a manager from my perspective, is knowing when to jump in, which is very rarely, and being able to, just trust in your team to do the right thing. I mean, be informed, but let them make those decisions. You're the manager, they're the developers.
Yeah, that's like such an interesting like set of challenges to balance, right? Because and I think especially so in smaller companies, like you said, where there is still this expectation, like if you're managing a smaller team, or there's there's a lot going on, being able to jump in and help where help is needed makes a lot of sense. But how you were describing that, it's kind of interesting, right? It's like, when do you need to do that versus like when do you want to? When does it make sense to give other individuals on the team a chance where like you might be like, hey, look, like I could probably figure this out. Like some background in this space, like I know I could go figure this problem out. And you might have someone on the team where you're like, oh, like, okay, this might make me feel a little bit uncomfortable for them to do it. But like sometimes you just let them do it, right? Like if they're not gonna, going to paint you into a corner or cause like a really big risk or so, like a big surface area damage, like sometimes giving people that opportunity, like you have the guardrails you can put in place. You want to make sure it's a safe place for people to fail. Like sometimes they need that, and it's hard because you, like you said, you kind of have to restrain yourself sometimes, and knowing when to step in to kind of help mitigate or course correct versus like, are you just doing that because you wanted to, or I don't know. It's a really difficult challenge.
I feel like what I'm coming around to the realization is that maybe it's only okay to step in, and for architectural decisions if I'm asked, and my team will ask me. They'll say, "Hey, I'm not sure about this. What do you think?" And then I'll give them my opinion. But just going in and making changes doesn't seem like the best course from my experience. But, if I do want to get involved in the code, I feel like it's reasonable to do things like, I'll pick up a bug here, I'll fix this bug. This isn't going to impact anything. This is a bug. I'll let my team focus heads down on the feature work, which takes a lot of focus and concentration. And I can pick up this bug. I'll knock this out in an hour or two. Or, this dependency needs to be updated. So I'll make the changes to fit it in there. But for the feature work, for the main product, parts of the product, I want the team to own that. Because the other thing is, if you're going in and you're diving into a feature, the other problem is you're not in the code day to day, and your team is, right? So you're making uninformed decisions based on your intuition, which that just goes wrong in so many ways.
And like for some people though, like they, if someone's listening to this, they might say, yeah, but I am in the code every day. Like in my former life, I was also in the code every day. So like that would have been fine. But like right now, absolutely not. If I was going into the code for my team at Microsoft, like they might not say anything, but they should say something, because I would be very uninformed. It wouldn't be a good move. And it's interesting. Like as you're kind of talking through that, I'm trying to see if I have like my own mini lesson in my head that would be like, hey, this is what I would recommend to people like listening. But I kind of come back to like, I see my role as a manager, I support, right? So as you were talking through like, hey, maybe I can fix a bug, maybe I can update dependencies. Like I see that as support. Unless you have someone on your team that loves to do that, maybe some people do. Probably most people don't, and they're like, I don't want to work on that crap. Like we have to do it, fine. But like, so if you're like, cool, I can let them focus on like the more engaging things, the more interesting things. You're supporting them by doing that. Now, there might be situations that come up, and depending on your team, the experience, there might be some feature or architectural change or something going on where they're like, we need help with this. We don't have that experience. And you can support them by providing some architectural guidance. Maybe you come up with the entire architectural spec, but this is one of those things where I would say, if you notice that your team sort of has that gap, and it's not their fault or anything, but if there is that gap, it's not that, oh, don't do it to help them. It might be, hey, this has to get done, but that's a good reminder. Maybe we should do something about this on the team. Do we need to skill people up with this technology? Do we need to see if there's like someone else that we can do an internal transfer? Is this a one-off thing and maybe I'm over-indexing on it? Like, I just try to take those as opportunities to reflect and see, should something change, or is this like a one-off kind of thing? But support.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting challenge. So in terms for your career, so you are currently an engineering manager leading teams?
Yep, I've been officially in management since I think since 2018.
Awesome, okay.
Right?
Yeah, okay. And so from what I'm hearing, there's still some work that is hands-on, but like you feel like at this point, like you're kind of gravitating more towards like, I'm trying to think through the question my HR leader was asking me, like to ask you, like, do you find yourself kind of going in that direction more, where it is more people leadership versus like the hands-on part? Because I know you also said it's hard to like remove yourself completely.
Yeah, that's a complicated question for me to answer. I sort of still like doing both things, right? I like being a manager. I like being able to have that effect on the organization. I like being able to, as I sort of mentioned earlier, I like being able to sort of play facilitator for my team. But I also still am very passionate about the tech, right?
Right.
So I don't know what direction I'm headed in. Maybe my direction is just staying where I'm at now in terms of just being an engineering manager or a hands-on kind of senior engineering manager for the rest of my career, and that might just be fine.
Yeah.
But I've said this sort of thing before. One of the lessons I've learned in my career is whenever I say I'm never going to do something, that means I'm probably going to do it. Like I said at one point, hey, I don't want to do web development when I was a backend engineer. Well, I went into web development, and I said I am never going to be a manager. Forget that. Now I'm a manager. And then I said things like, and when I was promoting my book, and when I was like working on a open source project that I had to promote, before I did any of that, I'm saying, I don't want to even touch marketing. That's dirty. I don't want to be part of that. And then I realized, well, I mean, you can't say that you don't want to market yourself because that's just not a smart point of view. So, now that I'm saying I never want to go into sort of, I was at the director level for a bit at my last job before I jumped to the current job I'm at, but I was still more or less hands-on. But now that I say I don't want to go into a true director level position, I'm sure that's going to be my next position. That's just sort of the way it works out, isn't it?
I was going to ask, is that more like, seems like coincidence, or is that something where you end up challenging yourself like more consciously?
Maybe subconsciously that is what's happening. It's sort of something that circulates around in my brain, and I'm saying I don't want to do this, and then the other voice is saying, why don't you want to do this? Maybe you should try it. Okay, I'll give it a shot.
Interesting. Yeah, one of the, like, when I reflect on career lessons, it's similar, right? You're in some cases here, this is more like for role changes and stuff, but I found that almost like from an imposter syndrome perspective, I found that if I'm dropped into this, because this happens to me in my career so far, I'm dropped into a position or like a project or a something where I'm like, oh my goodness, like, I don't know about this. Like, I feel, doesn't matter how much experience I have in whatever direction, like all of a sudden I feel like I'm at zero and I go, uh-oh, like, am I gonna make it out of this one? But every single time, like, you come out on the other end, you learn a ton. Was it perfect? Probably not, because nothing's perfect, but like, you made it through, you were successful. And it's like every time you do these things, it's like another lesson for you in your career where you can say in the next time, hey, look, all of those other times I made it out alive, right? With things to learn.
Yeah, when I first went into management, I sort of fell into management, right? So I was interviewing at a couple companies ago. I was interviewing for a lead software developer position. And midway through the interview process, they said, well, we have an opening for a manager. This is now pivoted to a manager position. Do you want to do that? And I said, I guess, because I had already gone through like 4 interviews and I thought, whatever, I'll just do it. But, from the time when I had left my previous job and I had a couple of weeks before I was going to start that job, I remember, and I'm sure my wife remembers this too, I was just absolutely freaking out. Like, I was just thinking, what did I do? Why am I going into management? This doesn't make any sense. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to be a manager. I've never been a manager. I was briefly sort of a manager in my first job and it went horribly. Why am I doing this again? I even gave speeches. I gave presentations a few jobs ago to high school students about careers. And one of the things I said is, one of the things I learned early on in my career is I should never go into management. Famous last words. And I'm thinking about all these things and I know I'm going into management. And like you said, I was dropped into it and I survived and I'm better off for it.
Yeah. And like that I think is such a tremendous lesson for people, because imposter syndrome and stuff happens for everyone, right? And some people, like, I don't know, won't admit it. I don't know why. I've talked to lots of people online that are like, that's not a real thing. And I'm like, I don't know how you can say that. But in fact, the more people, like the more experienced people that I have talked to, like, at VP levels and stuff, they're like, even to them at that level happens. And it's not like it's infrequent, but they have enough experiences where they can go, okay, like, I remember this feeling. Like, I can think about the hundreds of experiences before where this happened and like I got through. So it's just a good reminder to folks that you're going to experience lots of things in your career, and they're going to make you uncomfortable at different points because you don't feel equipped. And you will persevere, you'll learn plenty along the way, and it doesn't have to look perfect. It's
I
not going to
think
be
that
perfect.
that feeling of being uncomfortable kind of is more or less a good thing, right? I mean, it's not good. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable, but
Sure.
the alternative is kind of being bored and, set in your ways, and you're just sort of doing things, and maybe those things are important and maybe they're not, but you're not really advancing at all. So that state of being uncomfortable means you are, maybe hopefully evolving as a person or as a professional.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The more people I've talked to, I've realized that there are subsets of people, and I feel like, and I don't have like data on this, but I feel like proportionally smaller subsets of people that are like, hey, look, like I don't actually care enough. Like I'm cool. I'm actually pretty comfortable in my role. Like, it's interesting enough, but like there's not a lot of pressure. Like I'm good being just kind of comfortable with this. And I've met some people like this or talked to people like this, but I feel like the overwhelming majority is basically as you described. That includes myself, where it's like, I feel like if I'm a little bit uncomfortable, I'm being challenged in ways, I'm growing, I'm learning. Of course, as it happens, it's kind of scary because you're like, oh man, am I cut out for this? But yeah, it's always that reminder that there's growth that comes from that. And that means that, hopefully you are growing and getting better as a software engineer.
Yeah, I mean, there's that balance that obviously constant friction isn't a good thing,
Sure.
but also constant comfort. The other side of that is it's boring, right? And I'm sure, I feel this way, and I'm sure you do too. I want to kind of enjoy what I'm doing and get something out of it, and not just sort of you dial in the morning, so to speak, type up my TPS reports and then go home.
Yeah, like that for me, that's absolutely not what I want out of my career. And like I said, I think for some people they're totally cool with that, but I don't know. I feel like I like to work. And maybe that's part of it. Is like I like working. I like making sure that I feel productive, that I'm having an impact doing stuff, like interesting challenges. If someone was like, "Here's $1 billion, you never have to work again," I would be like, "I think I need to work because like I like to do it." It might just be that maybe I'm working on different things. I don't know. I like problem solving and I like building stuff. So I don't think that's ever going away.
Yeah, I've had that same thought myself. I mean, sometimes I do think, I'm sure you have this feeling too, where you'll have like a day where you think, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Why am I still in tech? I've been doing this my whole life. I don't want to do it anymore. This is enough. But then you think, well, what am I going to do? Am I just going to watch TV all day? I'm going to drive everyone crazy if I'm not working anyway. So this is who I am. This is what I do.
Yeah.
But there's definitely days where you think, well, maybe I could do something else.
Yeah. It's, the intrusive thoughts are there for sure. But I think at the end of the day, it's like I said, I love to build things, and I don't think that that's ever going to change. Sort of related to role changes and things like that. One of the notes that you had sent over, and I'm very curious about this, is like you had said, don't take new opportunities for granted, but know when to say no. And I was curious about this, especially given some of the background for like smaller companies and stuff. I imagine that there are plenty of situations you've been in where it kind of feels like, hey, I'm doing a lot already. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be overloaded, but like, I wanted to hear your perspective on like those like things that are truly like opportunities where you're like, this is new, this could be exciting, versus like I need to say no to this, and what that looks like for you.
So early on in my career, one of the things that I tried to do all the time was just pretty much say yes to everything.
Okay.
And because I was trying to make something of myself, right? So when I had the opportunity to go into front end development, yes, let's do it. When I had the opportunity to be the maintainer of an open source library, yep. Do you want to write a book about that? Okay, let's write a book about it. Do you want to start giving presentations to high school and college students? Yes, let's do that too. All these things, and before thinking if I actually had the time or energy to do it, I just sort of made it work because I felt like I just had this feeling like I couldn't see exactly why yet, but I felt like this is potentially opening a door somewhere.
Okay.
And in many cases that actually happened. Interesting story. So there was this there was this library that I inherited back in 2011 called it was called Valum's File Uploader, and I inherited it because I opened up some pull requests, and the maintainer said, "Do you want to just do this?" And I said, "All right, sure, I'll maintain it." And I grew it into a much larger open source library, renamed it Fine Uploader. It grew exponentially over time. And that did open a door for me later. I was interviewing for a company a few jobs after that, and I bypassed the entire interview process because the library that I maintained was the cornerstone of their product, which was interesting to find out. So that sort of got me in the door there. And it just saying yes to everything was tiring, but it gave me access to things that I wouldn't have otherwise had access to. It gave me new perspective. It made me a more well-rounded person and professional. But the no part, I feel like, is becoming more and more important as I, evolve and get further on in my career, because I have less free time now. I have to be more conscious of how I spend my time. I can't just be, before I had a family and everything, it was just, well, I can work all the time. Who cares? Whatever. I'll just do this. I'll do that. I'll write the book. I'll maintain the library. It doesn't make any difference. But now I have to be more conscious of my free time. I can't just be working all the time. So the opportunities that present themselves, if they fit into my schedule and they seem like they're worthwhile, then I'll say yes. Otherwise, I probably will say no. But honestly, the drawback of always saying yes early on in my career is I've kind of developed that reflex, right? Now it's hard to say no. And sometimes I've regretted saying yes. And when I look back, I wish I would have said no. So I'm still trying to formulate when it's appropriate to say yes versus no, when I should just say, no, I'm not going to do this.
Did you find at all that working in smaller companies made you do that more too? Where because we were kind of saying earlier, hey, if it's got to get done for the company, you got to wear the hat, someone's got to do it. Do you feel that had an impact on the saying yes part a lot, or tangential?
I think it probably did, because the expectation that you wear lots of hats means that the yes is implicit, right? So this customer is having an issue with their router. The customer support person is out today. Can you? The can you part is sort of a formality, right?
Yeah.
What they really mean is fix this for them, because there's no one else to do it. And we're a small company, and we can't just say sorry that your router's broken. We'll reach out to you in a week when the person's back from vacation. So that probably was part of the conditioning, right? Working for smaller companies where you just have to do a lot of things and you're conditioned to do a lot of things.
Yeah, as you were talking through that was part of my own personal reflection, because you also mentioned too, saying yes to a lot of things earlier on. Now it's like I don't have children or anything, but I was basically single for almost my entire early career, and now I'm married, and I certainly know that I cannot just work all of the time. I would not be married. So I know that I have to look at time management very differently now, and I was thinking that before, say yes to it's a startup. We have to say yes to things. It just has to get done. And I didn't have any other commitments. I could just work all of the time, right? I was an individual contributor and a manager. I had to work 2 jobs anyway. And I liked what I was doing. So it kind of all just compounded. So it was just, it's got to get done. Say yes, you work more, and everything seems like it's better because of it. But now I certainly cannot do it. I find myself also being hey, even if that seems like a good opportunity, I actually have to question myself. And I also have a very difficult time going should I be saying yes or no to this? I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it seems like a good idea, but then you have to weigh the consequences of committing to this additional thing, right? Given all the other things that are going on in your life. How is this going to affect those things and those people?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very interesting, because as you were saying, saying yes to things afforded you a lot of interesting opportunities that came up. There's more I don't know, not self-help or professional development kind of stuff that I'm either reading or watching, where the advice is very much learn to say no. Like, you need to be able to say no. And I'm kind of like, I still am struggling with that, where it's like, it's not, I guess the answer is not to say no to everything. It's to know when to say yes. But that means there's an overwhelming number of no's. And I still feel like, yeah, but when you say no, the door closes. Like, oh no, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, there is that. I don't know what the answer is. I think it's just the answer kind of is whatever you want to do, or it depends, right? Because I've sort of heard both extremes. The other extreme being just say no to everything. And eventually an opportunity will drop in your lap. And I don't know if that makes a lot of sense either. I don't want to be the person that says no to everything, that, if someone really needs something, that they're just going to stop asking you because you always just say no.
Right. Yeah. Like I align with that. Like, yeah, it seems like something that would not be a good fit for me, but as a result, then I'm like, I don't actually know what a better balance would be. There was another thing on your list that I wanted to ask you about, and I hope you're comfortable to talk about this because you wrote it down. But you said the challenges of being an introvert as an engineering leader, and I will break the ice a little bit on this one because it might not be obvious, but I am extremely introverted. When I people the whole day, which is my job, like there are some days if I do one-on-ones for the day, 5 o'clock hits, I nap. I have to nap because I am literally exhausted, not because I don't like what I'm doing, not because I don't like the people I'm talking to, but the amount of energy that requires for me is like it is physically and mentally exhausting. Again, not anything to do with the people specifically, just peopling in general is very tiring for me. So I was curious to hear from you, like your perspective on engineering leadership and being an introvert.
And I firmly believe that is more or less the definition of an introvert, right, versus an extrovert. When maybe I'm at a party or something, and I don't know, somehow it'll come out that I'm more or less introverted, and they'll be like, "No, you're not. What are you talking about? You're talking with me right now, or you give presentations, or what all this stuff."
Can't be introverted.
Right? Introvert doesn't mean you don't talk. You just sit in a corner and like sort of mumble to yourself. It's just kind of what you said, is that engaging with people in conversation saps your energy, right?
Right.
And the more you do that, the more recovery time you need, the more alone me time that you need. That's exactly how I feel too. Whereas, I know marketing people that, man, they could just talk all day long with people, and by the end of the day, they're just amped up from talking with people. At the end of end of that day, just listening to them talk to people, I want to go to bed. And that's the tough part. I feel like that, from my perspective, that makes being an engineering leader or a manager a little bit more challenging sometimes, because you're having a lot of conversations, sometimes difficult conversations even, which are even harder for me. But you're doing a lot of talking, you're doing a lot of expressing yourself, and at the end of the day, you're kind of wiped. And it's kind of odd, at the end of the day, I'll because I work from home, I'll go upstairs and I'll be like, oh, I'm so tired. I just want to go to bed. And my wife's probably thinking, you were just sitting at a desk all day. Why are you tired? It's kind of hard to explain because she's very much an extrovert, right? So it's kind of hard to explain to people who aren't like that, right? That you just need some recovery time. I still do like being an engineering leader. I like being a manager. I like engaging with my team. But I have to be mindful of my own energy levels, and I sort of design my schedule around that so that I can be effective, and not an entire day's worth of meetings where by the last 2 or 3 meetings I'm just sort of phoning in and not providing any value to the team. I need to be self-aware, right?
Yeah. And so, like, if you don't mind me asking, what is like a, not hyper specific, but like what kind of scheduling wise in terms of like meeting with the team and kind of laying out your week, like what feels like a good fit in terms of kind of making all that work?
There's a couple of things I like to do with scheduling. First of all, I like to group kind of, I don't like to group meetings one after the other, like literally one after the other, where you have one 9 to 9:30, then 9:30 to 10, then 10 to 10:30, because then I'm going to get really tired, and I just need like a break in between those. So I kind of like to cluster the meetings together, but I want a little bit of like a half hour or 15-minute break in between them so I can gather my thoughts, so I can sort of, just sort of meditate or get ready for the next meeting. And I sort of like to have a day where I do all my one-on-ones. So I'm mentally prepared to go through all those one-on-ones. I have everything that I need to talk about all set on those on the day for the one-on-ones, and I get through them. And I know it kind of sounds like I'm talking about it like it's a chore, and I don't really see it that way, but I need to be self-conscious, right? I need to understand myself so that I can be effective for my team when I'm having these conversations. I don't want to be sort of just at the end of my rope, like out of energy when I'm talking with them. I want to be fully present, and I want to be listening to them, and I want to be engaging.
It's funny too, because as you were saying that and then saying you have a day of one-on-ones, I was like, if I go to tell you that I also have a day of one-on-ones, I was nervous that you would say, yeah, but that doesn't make any sense, because don't you need the time to to recover? I like to be able to cluster it, and like you said, to be able to kind of prepare for, like, I have effectively 2 days of the week where all of my one-on-ones happen across those 2 days. And that allows me to kind of mentally prepare for that. Again, it's not, like you said, it's not a chore. It's just that, like, I know that I have to kind of have that mindset going into it. I have other days where they're mostly like things I can either follow up with partner teams or work with some of my PMs on things, or carve out time to go through like design documents and stuff. Like, it's more, I don't know, like it's not like specifically like people personal kind of stuff going on, and I can navigate that way more effectively, but I have to compartmentalize some of those days for that. So
Do you find that, and this, I ask you this because this is sort of what I do, is I like to, maybe you do the same thing. I sort of like to, I'll have meetings when meetings need to be had, but I like to fall back on written communication as much as possible. And there's a lot of benefits to that. Written communication is something that you can more easily share with others. It's more easier to broadcast, but also I don't, writing things down doesn't sap my energy, and it gives me time to really think over what I'm communicating to everyone else. So when I have to jump into a meeting and have a face-to-face, I will do that, but I prefer to communicate in, written form whenever it makes sense. And I feel like that is a good trade-off. And I feel like it's made me a better writer falling back on written communication as much as I have.
yeah, and so I'll answer that, and that might be a good kind of like a sort of last topic as well, because one of the other things that you wrote down was leadership in a remote work environment, and I think for my answer kind of ties into some of that. So yes, if I think that something could be written communication, I would much rather do that. I think that for at least the engineers I work with, almost all of them kind of will default back to that, like, hey, if we don't have to have a meeting, like, let's not, like, I'd rather actually work on my work. So yeah, if I can approach things written, I would rather do that. And I think one of the things that I need to sort of navigate is, like, if I don't understand my team well enough, then I can make the mistake of that being an assumption that's not true, where it's like, I like written communication, most other people on the team seem to, like, maybe I can just default to that, and I might have one person that's like, nope, I really need that face to face time, I need to be able to understand things better that way. And if I don't think about that, then I might be sort of excluding them in a way that's like more effective communication. So like for me right now, at Microsoft, the first team I was on was effectively all remote, including some people that are permanently remote and some people that they weren't coming into the office. So we also didn't. The team I'm on now, is I also have permanently remote people, and I go into the office a couple days a week. This is before the RTO announcement, so I was kind of doing it because other people would also go in. So why not? But yeah, I find that I think as long as I'm situationally kind of leading and thinking about how other people on the team like to be communicated with, then I can balance that out. Personally, I do prefer written if I don't need to do face-to-face stuff. One-on-ones will always be on a call kind of thing, but otherwise, yeah, written if I can.
Yeah, if it could be handled via, typing something out in Slack or an email or whatever, I think that generally tends to be the better way to solve it, because it gives everyone more time to think about what their answer is going to be or how they're going to respond to that, versus being on the spot, have 3 seconds to answer, just answer the first thing that comes into your head.
Yeah, and like that's a really important tip in general for for folks that like if you lead a lot of meetings, right? That could be not, you don't have to be a manager necessarily. You could be someone who is more senior, or you're putting a design doc together, or whatever it happens to be. You're organizing a meeting, even if it's not that you do it a lot. Something to consider is that I wish I could remember the framework for this. This was one of those times where we had manager training, and I was like, this is really interesting, but it's so rare that it happens, so the terms don't stick. But there were these personality types essentially, and they were describing that some people, I am one of these people, like must have information ahead of time to be able to like digest it, to formulate thoughts, to be able to talk about it. So for example, if you wanted to walk through a design with me, like if you were to just show me the design on the spot and be like, here's why all this, I would be overwhelmed and being like, I didn't have time to think about this, digest it. Where are the numbers for this? Like, I'm curious about how that works. Oh, maybe it's on one of these pages. I don't know. Like, I didn't, I can't do it on the spot. And other people, there were like 4 personality types, but there was one that was almost the exact opposite of that. And they actually thrive in being able to just like kind of explore on the spot and like more spontaneous. But if you're not totally, this might sound like it's like I don't know, like not really necessary, but I think it's very valuable to consider like the people on your team and how they are. Some people do better in those situations. I feel like most engineers are probably similar, but
yeah, I've met very few obvious extrovert engineers. Most of them seem to be more leaning towards the introvert side. I think it's just the way the trade is, right?
Yeah. It seems like very like sort of stereotypically that way, but again, for anyone who's in a leadership position, or even if you're just like, hey, how do I work more effectively with my teammates and stuff, it's something to consider, because people are different. So, and the more people you work with, the more of these situations are like, wow, like this interaction with this person seems kind of odd compared to everyone else I'm working with. Maybe that causes friction. Maybe it's actually a really good working relationship. But taking some time to go think about why that's the case, I think could be super helpful, and just like, I don't know, having better working relationships going forward. But is there anything from like a your number one sort of either tip or don't do it kind of thing when it comes to remote work and being able to navigate things that way?
Well, I think that there's a number of things that I think are important for working remotely that make it more effective. Some of those things are just kind of good principles to follow no matter what. I'm a very probably obsessively organized person. Like and I felt that's worked to my advantage significantly working remotely, because you're kind of, when you're working remotely, I feel like maybe it's not the case, but it feels like you're more independent, right? It just, I feel like I'm more independent as a remote worker. I get up in the morning, I go down to my office, and it's just me here. There's no other people here, and I have things to do, and I have to get those things done, and there's no one tapping me on the shoulder, and there's no one calling me, usually. And I just need to get things done, and I get them done, right? And I felt like being on top of things and being organized has helped me do that. So I would say, being organized, I practice things like inbox zero. So my inbox is like my to-do list. And it's my only to-do list, more or less. Just keeping your tasks organized in a way where you always know what the priorities are. You always know what you need to be working on. If a fire breaks out, once you put out that fire, if you're able to go back to do what you're supposed to be doing, and you understand, like, you don't keep a mental model of all your priorities. Write stuff down, right?
Good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. Because I don't know about you, but I'm very organized, but I can't remember anything. So if it's not written down, it probably, as far as I'm concerned, it didn't exist. So that's another thing.
The number one conversation with my wife is basically that. She'll be like, I just told you that. And I'm like, it's not written. It's not, like, I heard it and it was in there and I acknowledged it, but it's not on paper. It's not in a calendar. Like, doesn't exist.
Exactly. Yeah. If it's not written down, it doesn't exist. That's kind of how my brain works, or doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then the asynchronous part of it is something that I feel like you really need to embrace. My first foray into remote working was a pretty extreme version of remote working. Back in 2016, so my team was in Madison, Wisconsin. I wasn't a manager then, but I was sort of in a lead developer role, and I was working on a project over in Thailand. So I was 13-hour time difference, and I definitely learned a lot about how to be effective and to not be effective working remotely in that particular scenario. And the good thing about it, from my perspective, was every remote working scenario after that is going to be much easier to deal with, and of course it was. And I sort of learned to embrace asynchronous communication, and that's kind of what's really important with remote work. Asynchronous communication can be Slack or Teams or whatever you use. It can be, when you, and the people that are really good at remote work tend to be good at this too. This just happened today. Someone on my team, I noticed one of our development environments was having an issue where some of the API requests were taking a long time to return. I was like, what's going on here? Can you look into this for me? And the person looked into it, and he wrote up a document on Confluence documenting how he troubleshooted it to find out what the issue was and how he solved it. And then he published it in the how-to section of our Confluence page. So if anyone else comes across it, they would be able to just follow his playbook. That's how you remote work, right? That's how asynchronous communication works. Writing things down so that other people can discover them at their convenience. And I think that is a very important thing you would do as a remote worker. The other thing is, kind of my favorite word is inculcation, right? And that's to instill with repetition. So, this probably works in person too, but I've only been working remotely. I've been working remotely since 2017. So this is kind of all I know. Repeat things over and over and over again, but not the same way, in different forms, in different mediums. So it just sort of becomes something that's part of your subconscious, part of other people's subconscious, right? But really, going back to the last thing I said, asynchronous communication, if you can master that, I think you're going to be way ahead of the game as far as a remote worker. And good communication, verbose, but not overly verbose, right? So when you're trying to get help from a senior engineer in a remote work environment, don't type out every word as you're being charged for every word, right? You need to get as much detail to them as possible so they can help you out. There's that sort of fine line between being overly verbose, where the person is reading pages of information and their eyes roll back in their head and they say, let's just get on a call. I don't know what's going on. This is too much. Yeah. But highlighting important things for them to look at so that they can help you more effectively, and providing useful details. When you're reporting a bug, for example, this is something that really doesn't have anything to do with remote work, but it illustrates the point. When you're writing up a bug report, write it up not from your perspective. So the person who's looking at the bug report cannot get into your brain and know what you're thinking and what you're seeing. You need to spell everything out for them. Step by step, what did you do? What variables did you set? What did you see? What did you expect to see? That's just be detailed in your communication such that you can get your point across effectively.
That's actually something I don't want to say struggle with, but something that I have to consciously remind myself. I am naturally someone who communicates in a very, very verbose way. I also have this problem when I talk. When I make YouTube videos, I have to stop myself because I'm you've said the same thing 10 different ways. Just move on. It's part of kind of how I like to convey ideas. I'm already doing it right now where I'm talking too much. And I don't know exactly why I do it, but I think it stems from the fact that I want to make sure that I'm giving enough information. I don't want people to hear what I say and they're like, yeah, but where did that come from? Or where does that idea stem from, or whatever. And I talk too much. And I do the same thing when I write emails or when I'm sending a report on something. And I one of the strategies that I'm trying to do more of is I write it and I have to do multiple passes, and I try to bubble up the important parts. So I'm you know what? Someone's eyes are going to gloss over after line 2. Because they're going to see that I wrote a novel, and I need to write the novel because I want them to have the information if they need it. They know where to find it. It's documented. Other people can search it in their email. But go through it. What's the point? I will highlight things. I will put it to the top. And I'm if you stop reading here, at least you got hopefully what you needed. And I feel okay about that.
What you said there, I should have mentioned that because that's what I do too. But that's a really good thing to do. When you write something out, don't just send it. Read it. When you write it, read it over, and inevitably you're going to read it over and you're going to make a lot of changes. Or you're going to shorten. You're going to say, "Oh, this doesn't make any sense. Oh, what was I thinking here? Oh, that's totally incorrect." So proofread your own work. Read it. Try to. I mean, it's not easy to do, but try to read it from the perspective of someone who doesn't know what you know, or at least do your best to do that.
It's absolutely a skill, and like again, for someone who isn't practicing that, or they're hearing what you're saying and they're like, yeah, well, whatever, it's just a message, whatever, just an email, whatever, like getting in the habit of trying to do that, trying to refine it, like it is a skill that you will improve on. One of the things that you were saying that you said happened, I don't know if it was, I can't remember, sorry, if it was yesterday or today, I had something happen today where someone was writing documentation. They said, hey, could you review this? And for me, I'm of the mindset, like, if it's net new documentation, like, I'm not going to be picky, like, get it in there. I will, I basically, I approve right now, but I will read it and I'll give you feedback on it so you can enhance it. So one of the pieces of feedback was almost exactly what you were saying, where he wrote it and it's helpful, but it's from his perspective. So what I tried to do was kind of like use it as a teaching moment to say, hey, look, like, what you said here makes sense. But I said, imagine someone who's not as smart as you. They don't know this, right? You're in this spot, like you know the tools. You said, take this step, and I'm like, where do they find that? Like, how do they know what that tool is? What if they've never heard of it before? And I kind of went through point by point, and just to illustrate, like, these are all things that you know because you've worked on this. You are smart in this space. That's excellent. But what about the person that you're trying to help actually does not, that they're not smart. That's not the right thing to say, but they actually don't know this space. So like think about it from their perspective. And then he was like, oh crap, like really good point. And I went through and refined it. But yeah, you have to kind of think about who your audience is when you're
right. Know your audience. Who's going to be reading this?
Yeah, because it's probably not you, because you're the one who wrote it to guide people through it. So you probably at least have a pretty good idea what's what's going on for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's really cool. But Ray, I wanted to say thank you so much for this. I don't know if you have, like, if people want to reach out to you and get in touch with you, like, is there a best spot, like, I don't know, like LinkedIn or X or Blue Sky or anything like
I
that?
think the only social media I'm on is LinkedIn, but that's just, because we all kind of have to be on LinkedIn more or less, right? And I definitely lurk on Hacker News a lot, but that's about
Cool.
it.
Okay. Awesome. Well, okay. I guess not to put you on the spot, but a little bit on the spot. Any sort of parting words that you'd want to give to aspiring software engineers or someone trying to navigate tech?
Yeah, I know and I can't imagine what it's like just breaking into software engineering or tech right now with everything that's going on with AI. And I say that literally. I can't imagine what it's like. It must seem just overwhelming, like algorithms are going to completely make you redundant. And I honestly don't see that as the case. I feel like there's always going to be room for good problem solvers, for people to, even if AI sticks around, which it probably will, to wrangle the AI, to enhance it, to evolve it, to find new uses for it, to productize it. So don't give up hope. This is just another evolution of tech and software engineering, just like there's been many in the past. Just figure out where you can provide value.
I love that. Yeah, I'm of the same mindset, and I'm glad to hear that it's people got to stick with it. Things are going to change, they're going to evolve, but we're not really going anywhere, so it's going to look different. Cool. Okay, thank you so much, Ray.
Thanks for talking with me, Nick.